There is a difference between the silence you have gotten used to from him and the silence that is happening this week. This one feels different, heavier, not colder, heavier. Like something in him is finally being asked to hold weight he has spent a very long time avoiding. You cannot point to one thing that changed. There was no confrontation, no dramatic message, no sign you can screenshot and show a friend. Just a shift in the quality of his absence or maybe his presence, depending on which one you have been living with lately. A heaviness that was not there before. Something slower in how he moves through his own life, even from a distance. Maybe you noticed it in something small. The way a mutual friend mentioned him, and there was a pause before you answered, because something in you was already registering the change before your mind had a word for it. Or maybe it showed up in a dream you cannot fully explain, one where he felt tired in a way you had never seen him tired before, carrying something instead of running from it. Or maybe there was no clear moment at all. Just a general sense, low and constant, that whatever he has been avoiding for a very long time is finally catching up to him. You are not making this up. You are not projecting hope onto silence because you want it to mean something. This is a specific kind of noticing, the kind that happens when two people have been calibrated to each other long enough that a shift on one side registers on the other, even across distance, even without contact. If you have felt that shift in him this week, something heavier and slower rather than his usual distance, leave a like and subscribe so you do not miss what this actually means. Drop, "I feel him catching up" in the comments. Because what is happening in him right now has an explanation, and once you understand it, you will stop wondering if you imagined the shift. Right now, before we go any further, I want to put something directly in front of you. Because a shift like the one you are sensing in him this week does not come with a manual. You can feel that something moved. You cannot see the shape of it from where you are standing. A twin flame union personal reading was built for exactly this gap. Using your name, your birth chart, your exact timing, it reads what is actually shifting between you right now, what Saturn is asking of him specifically, and what your soul contract says about where this goes from here. The link is in the description. If something in you already knows this is the moment to look closer, follow that. Now let us go into what is actually happening in him. Saturn stationed retrograde on the 26th of July at 14 degrees Aries. That station is still fresh, still active, and Aries is not a subtle placement for Saturn to be working through. Aries is the sign of initiation, ego, the raw impulse to act before thinking. Saturn in Aries does not ask him to feel more. It asks him to slow down enough to take responsibility for what he initiates and what he has been avoiding initiating for a very long time. A retrograde does not create a lesson. It repeats one. Saturn retrograde in Aries is asking him to go back over a specific pattern he has half learned and never fully completed. The pattern of starting things, connections, feelings, commitments, and stepping back the moment they ask something real of him. This is not a punishment. Saturn rarely punishes. Saturn simply presents the bill for what was left unfinished. And right now, the bill has his name on it. Retrograde periods work differently than forward motion. Forward Saturn builds, retrograde Saturn audits. It goes back through the structures a person has already built and asks a quiet, unavoidable question. Is this actually solid, or does it just look solid from the outside? For him, the structure in question is almost certainly the one he built around staying safe inside a connection without ever fully arriving in it. Half in, available enough to keep the door open, guarded enough to never risk what full arrival would cost him. Aries energy does not like to sit still with a question like that. Aries wants to act, move, decide, be done with it. But Saturn does not let Aries rush this time. Saturn is asking him to slow down inside his own impulse to run, long enough to actually look at what he has been running from. That combination, urgency meeting a forced pause, is uncomfortable in a very specific way. It is the discomfort of a man who wants to move past something and is being made to sit with it instead. This is the 25% of this story that belongs to the sky. The rest belongs to him. There is a concept in developmental psychology called arrested development, and it does not mean what people assume it means. It does not mean someone is behind in every area of their life. Plenty of men who carry this pattern are accomplished, capable, even impressive in the parts of life that reward competence and control. Arrested development shows up specifically in the parts of a person that were never asked to mature because avoidance worked well enough for long enough. For him, that part is almost certainly the part responsible for emotional risk, vulnerability, staying present when a connection asks him to feel exposed instead of in control. Psychologist Erik Erikson mapped adult development as a sequence of specific tasks. Intimacy versus isolation is one of the central ones. A person either learns to risk real closeness, tolerating the exposure that closeness requires, or they find ways to simulate closeness while protecting the part of themselves that closeness would actually touch. Simulated closeness looks like connection from the outside. It has warmth, attention, even devotion at times. What it does not have is risk. He has likely been very good at simulated closeness with you. Present in bursts. Intense when it costs him little. And then gone, not because he stopped caring, but because the moment asked him to risk something he had never practiced risking. This is where object constancy becomes relevant, a concept from developmental psychology describing the ability to hold on to the emotional reality of someone and of a connection even when that person is not immediately in front of you, and even when the feeling in the moment is difficult. Children develop this gradually, learning that a parent who leaves the room still exists, still loves them, is still coming back. Some adults never fully complete this development in their intimate relationships. Distance still registers somewhere underneath conscious thought as disappearance. And disappearance still triggers an old, young, unspoken fear that closeness is not safe to sustain. This is not a flaw unique to him. It is common. What makes this week different is that Saturn is not letting him simulate his way around it anymore. The bill from earlier, the one with his name on it, is precisely this: the maturity he postponed by staying in control of how much he let himself feel. He is not becoming a different person this week. He is being asked, by timing bigger than either of you arranged, to finally start becoming the person he has had the capacity to be the entire time. There is a Jungian angle worth naming here as well, because it explains why this particular week feels like more than an ordinary mood shift in him. Carl Jung wrote about the shadow, the part of a person that gets pushed out of conscious awareness because it is too uncomfortable, too costly, too threatening to the self-image someone has built. For him, the shadow has likely held everything he could not afford to. Look it directly: the fear underneath the confidence, the need underneath the independence, the parts of him that are, quite simply, still young in exactly the places love asks him to be steady. Shadow material does not disappear because it is avoided. It waits. And it tends to surface exactly when the outer conditions finally match its readiness to be seen, which is very often what a retrograde is actually doing astrologically. Not creating the material, applying pressure until what was already there becomes impossible to keep hidden. That is what is happening in him right now, not a personality change, a surfacing. You have not been chasing him this week, and that matters more than you probably realize. There was a version of you earlier in this journey who would have met his heaviness with more reaching, more checking, more trying to close the distance for both of you because it felt unbearable to let it sit open. You are not doing that right now, or you are doing much less of it. And the difference is not small. Steadiness that does not chase is a completely different signal than pursuit. Pursuit gives an avoidant pattern something to retreat from. Steadiness gives it nothing to retreat from, which means the discomfort he is avoiding has nowhere to relocate. It just sits there, in him, asking to be dealt with directly instead of managed by distance. This is not a strategy you are running to change him. It only works, in fact, if it is not a strategy. It works because you have actually grown into a woman who does not need to manage his process for him anymore. That growth is yours. It happened slowly, probably without a single dramatic marker you could point to. You have likely wondered more than once whether you are actually different or just tired. Whether the steadiness is real growth or a defense that looks similar from the outside. That is a fair question, and it deserves more than guessing. A twin flame journey tracker and progress workbook exists for exactly that uncertainty. Not another explanation of the stages. A place to actually see your own pattern over weeks and months, so you are not relying on memory, which softens things and sometimes convinces you nothing has changed when everything has. 39 pages built to track where you actually are, log the synchronicities you would otherwise forget by next week, and show you in your own handwriting the version of you that stopped needing to chase. Because right now, while he is being asked by Saturn to finally hold his own weight, you are the one holding yours. Quietly, without announcing it. And that quiet is doing more work on this connection than any conversation could. There is also something worth understanding about the dynamic itself, the shape you and he have been living inside without either of you naming it directly. Psychologist Stephen Cartman described a pattern that shows up in almost every strained connection, a triangle with 3 positions: the rescuer who tries to fix and manage, the victim who feels overwhelmed and unable to act, and the persecutor who ends up cast as the source of the pain, fairly or not. For a long stretch of this journey, you may have moved between rescuer and victim without realizing it, trying to manage his process while also feeling powerless over the outcome. What steadiness actually does is remove you from that triangle entirely. You are no longer trying to rescue him from his own avoidance. You are no longer positioned as the one, waiting to be saved by his change. You are simply standing outside the triangle, whole on your own terms, which is precisely the position that tends to shift a dynamic that pursuit and rescue never could. Here is what not to do with everything you are sensing in him this week. Do not reach out to explain the shift you are noticing. Do not send the message that tries to name what is happening in him before he has named it himself. If you hand him the insight before he has earned it through his own discomfort, you hand him a way to skip the very process that is finally working on him. Let Saturn finish what Saturn started. What you can do is keep living the steadiness you have already built. Keep choosing yourself in the small, undramatic ways that do not require an audience. Keep noticing, quietly, when you feel the old urge to reach and manage and fix, and let that urge pass without acting on it. It also helps to remember that his timeline and your timeline do not have to match for either of you to be doing this correctly. Saturn moves slowly by design. Retrogrades especially move slowly, doubling back over the same ground until the lesson actually lands instead of just being noticed and set aside. He may take weeks to arrive at the other side of what is surfacing in him right now. He may take longer than that. Your job was never to control the pace of his process. It was only ever to become someone whole enough that his pace stopped being the thing your peace depended on. That work is largely done, or well underway, or you would not have noticed the shift in him with the calm clarity you are noticing it with right now. A woman still fully entangled in managing a connection does not usually have the spare attention to observe a shift this quietly. She is too busy reacting to notice. The fact that you can see this clearly, name it accurately, and still go about your own week without spiraling is itself the proof of how far you have come. He is not going to announce the shift to you. Growth like this rarely announces itself. It shows up later, in small corrections. A message that carries more honesty than his usual pattern, a moment where he stays present instead of retreating. A willingness, eventually, to risk the exposure he has spent so long avoiding. You do not need to wait for that to happen in order to be complete right now. That is the actual practice this week is asking of you, not watching him for signs of change, being the woman who does not need the signs in order to feel whole. Saturn does not move quickly, neither does real maturity. But something in him has already started, whether he can name it yet or not. You felt it this week as a heaviness. What it actually is the beginning of him finally becoming someone capable of meeting what you have already grown into. Leave a like and subscribe if you felt the shift in him this week. Drop "I feel him" catching up in the comments and tell me what it has looked like on your end. If you want the specific map of what Saturn is asking of him, and what this means for your particular timing, the link for your twin flame union personal reading is in the description. I will see you in the next one.